We all have these mental shortcuts, don't we? For years, maybe when you thought innovation, China wasn't top of mind.
Right. Maybe Silicon Valley, maybe somewhere in Europe.
Exactly. But get this. The World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, they rank China 11th globally for innovation.
Hmm. That's already challenging the old view.
And there's more. Back in 2016, China actually started publishing more science and tech articles than the U.S.
And that lead's only grown since then, significantly.
Okay, so clearly there's a gap here between, the common perception and what the numbers might be showing. Let's unpack this.
It really is fascinating. You're seeing this narrative shift almost in real time. That old image, China as just the world's factory, maybe making copies, it's being overtaken by the data.
It really is. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've gone through some, pretty compelling sources. There's a big report from ITIF, that's the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. It gives a really detailed sector-by-sector look.
Yeah, that one's quite thorough.
We're also looking at some historical context. How did China get here? And of course, the whole U.S.-China relationship looms large.
It's the backdrop for everything, really.
So our mission for you today is pretty straightforward. Get past the headlines. Let's try to understand the real story of Chinese innovation.
Where are they actually leading? We're getting close.
Right. What's driving it? And crucially, what does it mean for everyone else? For business, for tech, maybe just for understanding the future?
Yeah, we'll touch on the tech breakthroughs, the economic models behind it, and that geopolitical competition.
It's like three legs of a stool, right? The tech itself, the economic engine, and the U.S.-China dynamic.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's jump in. The big question. Can China genuinely innovate? Or is it still mostly catch-up imitation?
Well, the IDIF report tackles that directly.
Oh.
And their conclusion, pretty clear.
Yeah.
That old idea China just copies. It's
Ah.
outdated, full stop.
Okay, so that forces us to think about what innovation even means, doesn't it? It's not always about inventing something totally from scratch.
Exactly. And the sources point to several indicators showing they're moving beyond just imitation.
Like the WIPO index we mentioned, climbing up the ranks.
Right. And that explosion in scientific publishing you brought up.
By 2022, almost 900,000 articles. That's,
Huh.
wow, nearly 500,000 more than the U.S.?
It suggests a massive investment, a huge focus on research. And it's not just quantity. There's talk about the quality improving, too.
Patents tell a similar story.
They do. Third most patents granted by the U.S. Patent Office in 2020. And one study suggested their contribution in frontier tech patents was maybe on par with the U.S. by the late 2010s.
That's incredibly fast progress.
It really is. And what's striking is how these innovation hubs, these clusters, are growing within China.
Oh, right. The WIPO tracks those.
Yeah, science and tech clusters. China went from 6 in the top 100 globally in 2017 to 23 by 2023.
23. Wow. More than the U.S. on that metric.
They surpassed the U.S., yeah. And the European Innovation Scorecard also shows China's overall innovation capacity growing significantly.
So it paints a pretty strong picture. But the IDIF report adds a note of caution, right?
It does. It mentions, potential incentives for Chinese companies to maybe overstate their innovation. Plus, getting completely objective data from inside China, it'd be tricky.
Always a challenge. So we see these strong indicators, but we need to be a bit critical. Acknowledge the data gathering difficulties.
Exactly. Compelling signs, but approach with nuance.
Okay. So, big picture, significant accelerating innovation. Now, let's get into the specifics. Industries. That IDIF report had a table, right? Table 3.
Yes, really useful. Gives a snapshot across 10 key industries.
And what's a general takeaway?
It suggests China's either leading or, pretty much level in commercial nuclear power and also EVs and batteries.
Okay. Ahead or neck and neck there? What else?
Then there's a group where they're, let's say, near the lead. Robotics, chemicals, AI, biopharmaceuticals. Closing the gap fast.
And where are they still behind?
Currently lagging in semiconductors, quantum computing, displays, and machine tools. Though, importantly, the report says they're making rapid progress in most of those.
Except maybe semiconductors because of the export controls.
Semiconductors are the big exception there, yeah. The controls definitely bite.
Okay, let's zoom in a bit. Robotics, that sounds really dynamic. The report mentions places like Songshan Lake.
Yeah, rapid development, lower costs. It feels like a new kind of robotics hub is emerging there. The speed of iteration, the whole supply chain right there. It's different.
Faster, cheaper than established hubs, maybe.
That's what some experts suggest, yeah. But it's important to remember, China's still the biggest importer of industrial robots.
Ah, Right, and they rely on foreign tech for key parts.
For some critical components, yes, like harmonic year reducers. But that said, there's real domestic innovation happening too.
Like in what areas?
Materials handling companies like Geek, HAI, components leader drive. And you have these startups like Unitree doing really interesting things with advanced robots.
Making them more accessible.
Exactly. And then there's the whole push into humanoid robots. Huge ambition, lots of state funding behind it.
They have goals for, like, mass production soon.
Breakthroughs by 2025, mass production by 2027.
Okay.
Incredibly ambitious. It shows a serious strategic focus.
Okay. Let's switch gears. Chemicals. ITIF highlights price advantages for Chinese firms.
Yeah, partly linked to state ownership, subsidies, and they're just building out capacity like crazy. Aggressive expansion.
We've seen that playbook before, like in solar panels. Build big, drive down costs.
It's a hallmark. And while maybe the initial breakthroughs came from elsewhere, China's become really good at process innovation.
Like for lithium batteries, solar panels you mentioned.
Exactly. And there's also a push now to make the chemical industry greener, more sustainable.
Okay. Now, machinery and equipment, including machine tools, which are super important.
Right. And the trend here is stark. China's global market share is climbing. The U.S. share declining.
That's a big shift. But are they making the best stuff yet? The really high-end machine tools?
That's the key distinction. They still lag in the most advanced high-precision CNC machines, still importing the top tier from Japan, Germany.
But they're trying to change that. Made in China, 2025 and all that.
Absolutely. The government is pushing hard. And the report does mention some homegrown innovation, like a 3D printing CNC machine, an intelligent CNC system from Huazhong CNC.
So, steps in the right direction. They're not standing still.
Definitely not. Clear commitment to moving up the value chain, reducing that reliance on foreign tech.
Okay, nuclear power, commercial nuclear. The report says China wants to develop all 6 types of Generation 4V reactors. That sounds like a lot.
It's massively ambitious. Signals a deep, long-term commitment to nuclear energy. They're exploring everything thorium reactors, even floating nuclear power plants.
Wow. Okay. Semiconductors, obviously a huge focus, very geopolitical right now.
Yeah.
Massive government investment, the report says.
Huge investment. But, as we mentioned, still facing big hurdles, especially for the most advanced logic chips and the equipment needed to make them, like lithography.
There's still generations behind there.
Experts estimate several generations behind in those specific leading-edge areas. Yeah, the U.S. controls really target that.
But it's not all bad news for them. They're making progress elsewhere.
Right. The report notes progress in less advanced chips, legacy stuff. That production is quite resilient. And interestingly, their domestic market share for Chinese-made chip-making tools is actually going up.
So they're adapting, finding ways to grow even with the restrictions.
It shows strategic adaptation, focusing on areas where they can make progress right now.
Okay, turning to EVs and batteries. Here, the report sounds pretty definitive. China's dominant.
Pretty much paints a picture of dominance, yeah. Production, sales, battery manufacturing capacity, companies like CATL, FDB, they're giants.
That early policy support really paid off for them, gave them a head start.
Huge first-mover advantage. Let them build scale, lock in supply chains.
And finally, AI, artificial intelligence. The report says they're closing the gap with the U.S. really fast.
Very rapidly. Especially in research output on generative AI, it's moving quickly.
And the impact of their AI research is growing.
Yes, plus strong government support, pushing AI into key industries. It's a determined effort to lead in this really transformative tech.
You also see things like open source, large language models growing within China.
That's another significant sign, yeah.
Yeah.
A growing ecosystem there.
And what about biopharma? U.S. is still the leader there, right?
Yes, leads. Currently, yes. But the report highlights China's increasing innovation. More biotech publications, more novel drugs being developed in China.
They're striking more deals to license their drugs out.
Exactly. More out-licensing deals. And even getting some new Chinese drugs approved by the FDA in the U.S.
Focusing on advanced stuff like monoclonal antibodies, CRT therapies.
Yes, really pushing into those novel drug types.
Yeah.
But the report also cautions they still need to build out the full ecosystem.
Like stronger IP protection.
That's a big one. You need that robust ecosystem to sustain leadership in biopharma long-term.
Okay, so we've seen the evidence across all these different sectors. A lot of progress, some areas still catching up. Now, what's driving this? What's the engine here?
Well, the ITIF report really digs into this. It contrasts the Western economic model with China's approach.
And what's the core difference they highlight?
It really emphasizes the Chinese Communist Party's determined effort, the government's strategic focus on dominating these advanced industries. This isn't accidental.
It's a core national goal.
Absolutely. And they contrast the models. The West often focuses government funding on basic research, hoping the private sector runs with it.
Right, the linear model, sort of.
Whereas the Chinese model puts much more emphasis on applied R&D. Research aimed directly at gaining a competitive edge in the market. It's more targeted.
And there's a different economic philosophy, too. Investment versus consumption.
Big difference. Western economies, especially the U.S., often prioritize consumption. China prioritizes investment, seeing it as necessary for long-term power and tech leadership.
A trade-off they seem willing to make.
Very much so. The report uses this term, national power capitalism, to describe China's approach.
Highlighting the state's active role.
Exactly. Guiding, supporting strategic industries. And another point they make, China gets way more R&D workers per dollar spent than the U.S., just a massive research workforce.
And because they started focusing on some industries early, they got a head start. Scale economies.
Yes, that early prioritization gives them a huge advantage now. Scale, learning curve benefits.
Plus, just the sheer size of their home market, that's got to help.
Massive built-in demand. And having those local suppliers, the specialized manufacturing clusters all close together, it speeds everything up, fosters more innovation.
Creates this powerful ecosystem.
And don't forget, government subsidies, other protections for domestic firms. That helps them compete.
What else? Deep specialization.
Yeah, huge numbers of researchers focused on very specific areas. And the government actually encourages some risk-taking within certain boundaries.
And the report mentions expertise within the government itself, on science and tech policy.
Deep expertise there, and in academia. It's a very strategic, very informed approach overall.
So you put all that together. It's a picture of a really coordinated, determined national push for innovation leadership.
That's the key takeaway on the drivers.
Okay, so what does all this mean? What are the implications, especially for the U.S.?
Well, the ITIF report suggests a few things. One is that as China gets better at innovating, they become more self-sufficient.
Less vulnerable to things like sanctions or pressure.
Exactly, which has knock-on effects for their military capabilities, their influence in foreign affairs.
The report also talks about the nature of these innovation industries, right? High fixed costs, low marginal costs.
Yeah, which means scale is everything. And as China achieves that scale, well, you could see some really rapid shifts in global economic power. It might not be gradual.
Could be sudden shifts. Scary thought.
And the report then discusses different types of capitalism in the U.S. market. Global, worker-focused, green.
And argues that maybe only a different approach, what they call national power capitalism, can really compete.
That's the argument they make, that the U.S. might need a more strategic approach, maybe mirroring some aspects of China's model to stay competitive.
What would that look like, according to the report? What are the elements?
It outlines several things. More industrial research institutes like Germany's Fraunhofer, maybe a competitiveness DARPA focused on commercial tech, an industrial development bank.
More direct support. What else?
Boosting tax credits for R&D and equipment, a big push on STEM talent, strategically picking key industries to back, building deeper domestic supply chains.
Regional innovation hubs. A different regulatory approach.
Yeah, fostering those hubs and encouraging more permissionless innovation, making it easier to try new things quickly. It's a pretty comprehensive list, a big shift.
So the report kind of ends by outlining possible futures for the U.S. response.
Right. Basically, continue as is, maybe gradually shift strategy, or perhaps a major event, like a Taiwan crisis, forces a much bigger, faster change.
And the authors seem to think the choices the U.S. makes now are pretty critical for the future.
Very much so.
Yeah.
They argue the future global economic and innovation landscape really hinges on the U.S. response to China's rise.
Okay. So let's try to bring this all together. Our deep dive into these sources. It seems the main takeaway is pretty clear.
Yeah.
China is not just the world's factory anymore, not by a long shot. They are rapidly becoming a serious innovation player across many advanced industries.
Posing a significant competitive challenge globally.
Right. That old narrative, the copycat narrative, it just doesn't fit the facts anymore. It's outdated.
And that shift, it forces us to rethink a lot about global economics, about technology, about the balance of power going forward.
Definitely changes the landscape. We have to reconsider our assumptions.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. Thinking about everything we've covered today. What single factor do you think is the most critical driver behind China's rapid innovation growth? Is it the government's top-down strategy, the huge market size, that deep research specialization, something else?
That's a good question. Lots of interacting factors.
And maybe the follow-up is, what, if anything, could the U.S. learn or adapt from China's approach as it figures out how to compete in this new era?
Definitely something to ponder. Maybe worth digging into those sources yourself if you're curious.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.